8 has left the courtroom. It appears as though his circumstances have changed since jury selection, and it will now be a financial hardship. What's the people's position?
I don't like it, but I think that he qualifies as financial hardship. I'll submit to the court.
All right. The defense?
I think it's a very, lack of a better term, uncool thing of his employer to do, but, we have no choice really. We'll submit.
All right. Do you have any objection to excusing him for hardship?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, it's, and again, I've reviewed California Rules of Court 2.1008. Unfortunately, he does qualify for financial hardship based on the change of circumstance, and he will be excused. So, Manny, can we bring back in juror number 8, please?
Yes, sir.
All right, juror number, you can stay right there. We've discussed the matter, and you do qualify for financial hardship. So at this point, I am going to excuse you from future service in this case, okay? I'm going to order that you have no contact, however, with the remaining jurors. You can say goodbye to them, but don't have any contact or discuss the case with them, okay?
Yes, sir.
And I want to thank you for your willingness to serve. I know you're kind of put in a tough spot here, and the circumstances have changed, but I think both parties and the court agrees you would have been an excellent juror in this case, and we're sorry to lose you. But thank you very much for your willingness to serve.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Have a nice day. I'm sorry?
I apologize for the inconvenience.
No apology necessary. Thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you, Your
Have a nice day.
You too.
All right, we now need to seat an alternate. This court's procedure is to put 4 names in a bowl, and we'll have Mr. Winslow pick the alternate juror. So we've written down alternate number 1, 2, 3, and 4 on a piece of paper. And just to be clear, as you're looking at the seats in the jury box, it goes alternate number 1 is in the top row, closest to the jurors that have been sworn. Juror number 2 is in front of that person, juror number 3 is in the back corner, and juror number 4 is in the front row on the end. So, Mr. Winslow, have you picked out a number?
Yes, sir.
And who is it?
Alternate 1.
Okay, alternate number 1 will be seated as a juror, and what we will do is move the other alternate who has kind of a lower seat to that top row so they have a better view. So, also, as an administrative issue we discussed out in the hallway, I reviewed the file, and the 2 previous cases had never been administratively dismissed. They've all been consolidated. So is there any objection to the court dismissing case ending 524 and 071 administratively since they've been consolidated and have the criminal protective order transfer over? Mr. Owens?
No objection. Thank you.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, then case number SCN 388524 and CN 397071 will be dismissed administratively in the criminal protective order in case ending 520 will be transferred over to the new case. All right, are there 5-4, thank you. Are there any other matters before we bring in the jury?
Just the issue with the investigating officer, Your Honor, if I could just have an opportunity before calling our first witness.
Okay.
And since the jury's not in, can I have 1 minute?
I'm sorry?
Can I have 1 minute, just the jury's not in, just,
Yes.
we'll be right back.
Okay. All right. Well, any objection to declaring this detective as the investigating officer?
No objection.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. So it's Detective Benavides. Is that correct? All right. Good morning, sir. Detective Benavides will be declared as the investigating officer. All right. And there appears to be some technical issue in the back of the courtroom. We'll take a minute and they can fix that issue. Okay. All right. We'll be in recess. How much time do you need, Mr.?
It's just a minute, Your Honor.
Okay.
2 minutes at most.
Okay. We'll be in recess for 5 minutes. How's that? 5 minutes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Remain seated and come to order. Court's in session.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here on time. Sorry for the delay. We had an issue with one of the jurors. But the record will reflect the presence of all counsel. The defendant is present. And also, Mr. Owens, you want to introduce the person sitting to your right?
If I may, Your Honor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. The people would ask the court's permission to designate as an additional investigating officer Detective Michael Benavides from the San Diego Sheriff's Department Sexual Assault Unit, seated to my right.
All right, is there any objection to the additional investigating officer being so designated?
Yeah.
Okay, then Detective Benavides will also be designated as the investigating officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We were delayed this morning because juror number 8 had an issue. There was no misconduct or anything. He had an issue with his employer, and he had to be excused. So that's why we have alternate jurors, though. So I think I may have explained this last week. We have alternates 1, 2, 3, and 4. But that's not the order in which you're called into service, because I want all of you paying attention. And the way we select the alternate to serve as the full juror is we put the 4 numbers in a bowl, and the defendant then pulls a number out of that bowl. And he pulled alternate number 1. So alternate number 1, you have now been promoted. So you have your notebook that says alternate number 1, correct? Okay, that's going to be your notebook. Okay. And did we take juror number 8's notebook?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that you keep that notebook, and you can come around to the front row right here. And then for alternate juror number 3, would you be better off sitting up a little bit higher? Is that better? Yeah. Okay, that's going to be your permanent seat, but you are still designated as alternate juror number 3, okay? Yes, sir. All right. Are you all settled in?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, thank you. And as I indicated yesterday, I did put a charging summary in your notebooks. That just gives you a list of the dates and the charges and the Jane Doe's number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Obviously, we don't use their true names to maintain our anonymity. So that is just a guide to kind of help you keep the Jane Doe straight as to which counts apply. All right. Then, Mr. Owens, are you ready to call your first witness?
We are, thank you.
All right, go ahead.
The people now call Deputy Sean Dwyer.
All right. And now, before you do, just to be clear, alternate number 1, you were originally juror number 28, correct?
Yes.
That's right. Okay, because we're not using names, obviously. Okay. Go ahead and swear the witness.
You do solemnly state that the testimony you are about to give in the matter now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
If you would, please have a seat at the witness stand. And if you would, please state your name and spell your first and last name for the record.
Deputy Sean Dwyer, SEAN DWYER.
Thank you.
All right. Good morning, Deputy. Thank you for being here. Direct examination.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Good morning, Deputy Dwyer.
Good morning.
Can you tell the jury what you do for a living?
I'm a deputy sheriff with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department.
As of today's date, how long have you been a deputy with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department?
Since October of 2014.
What is your current assignment with the Sheriff's Department?
I'm currently assigned to the Encinitas Patrol Station.
The what?
Are you in fact a patrol deputy?
Yes.
So, can you tell the jury what a patrol deputy is?
I respond to radio calls for service, and then also responsive for proactive patrol.
What does that typically mean in terms of what you would have to do on a day-to-day basis?
The majority of my day does consist of responding to radio calls throughout the city of Encinitas, and then during downtime, we're expected to conduct proactive patrols.
Now, as of June of 2018, a little less than a year ago, were you also working in a patrol deputy capacity?
I was.
On June 7th of 2018, were you patrolling and responding to calls for service in the city of Encinitas?
I was.
Can you give us an idea of the area that the Encinitas Substation, also known as the North Coastal Substation of the Sheriff's Department, what area it patrols?
We're responsible for the main city of Encinitas, Rancho Santa Fe, Solana Beach, and Del Mar. And my direct responsibility was the Olivenhain area of Encinitas.
And as of June 7th of 2018, were you patrolling in the Olivenhain area of Encinitas?
I was.
Did you respond to a call for service?
I did.
Did you in fact respond to a neighborhood that is located off of North El Camino Real in the city of Encinitas that day?
That's correct.
On that day, did you receive a photograph of a large SUV?
Yes.
What type of vehicle was it?
It was a Hummer H2, the truck model.
When you say that it's a truck model, can you explain what you mean?
The standard looking Hummer with a small truck bed.
Now, did you receive a photograph of that Hummer parked within a neighborhood?
Yes.
Did you also receive a photograph of that same Hummer and its specific license plate?
Yes.
Did you ultimately contact an individual who was driving that same Hummer that afternoon?
Yes.
What time was it that you responded to the call for service?
May I refer to my report?
Yes, if it would refresh your recollection.
The original call for service was at 14:30 hours, 2:30 hours.
Would that be 2:30 in the afternoon?
Yes, sir.
And what time was it when you contacted an individual who was driving the Hummer H2?
May I refer to my report?
Please do.
It was about 1700 hours.
Would that be 5 o'clock in the evening?
Yes, sir.
When you contacted the individual who was driving the Hummer, did you see who it was?
Yes,
Do you see that person in court today?
I did.
Can you state where that person is seated and what he is wearing for the record?
He's sitting at the defense table wearing a dark blue suit.
All right, what color tie is he wearing?
I can't see it.
You can stand up if you need to.
It's yellow.
Okay, the record will reflect identification of the defendant.
Thank you, Your Honor. When you contacted the defendant that day, did you in fact take his photographs?
Yes.
Did you speak with him that day?
Yes.
In addition to taking his photographs, did you, as well as another deputy, collect a DNA reference sample directly from him?
That's correct.
Can you explain to the jury what you do and what the process is for collecting a reference sample of DNA?
We have a prepackaged kit with 2 oral swabs. They're basically large Q-tips. We swab each side of the individual's mouth. A plastic cap's pulled over the Q-tip, and then it is sealed in an envelope with an evidence seal and signed, and then the evidence was passed to a detective.
So first, let me ask you about how you received training in order to collect a buccal swab. Is that what that's known as, simply a buccal swab?
Yes, sir.
Where is it that it's collected from in order to obtain someone's DNA?
Generally from the inside of the individual's mouth.
When you say the inside of the mouth, do you actually rub it against the cheek?
Yes.
When was it that you first initially received training in order to collect buccal swabs?
I had initial training in the academy and then follow-up training when I went out to patrol.
Who would provide the training when you were on patrol?
It would have been my training officer.
How long do you spend with a field training officer with the Sheriff's Department before becoming independent and working on your own?
A minimum of 4.5 months.
On June 7th of 2018, were you working with another deputy as you collected the DNA?
I was.
Who was that?
It was Deputy Hoodenpyle.
Can you spell that for the record?
It's Hoodenpyle.
Who was it that physically removed the DNA sample kit and collected the buccal swabs from the interior portion of the defendant's cheek?
Deputy Hoodenpyle.
Were you present when that was done?
I was.
Did you in fact explain to the defendant what you were doing and what Deputy Hoodenpyle would be doing?
Yes, sir.
After Deputy Hoodenpyle physically collected the buccal swabs, what did he do with them?
He placed them inside the envelope, which I then sealed.
When you say that you sealed it, can you just explain specifically what you did with the Q-tips or the buccal swabs themselves?
So like I said, the cap was pulled over the tip of the Q-tip and then placed inside a yellow envelope, which is clasped, and then a red evidence piece of tape is placed over to seal it officially.
After you sealed the sample that had been collected from the defendant you identified in court, you mentioned that you provided it to a detective, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
What was the name of the detective that you provided it to?
Detective Johnson?
Would that be John Johnson from the Sexual Assault Unit of the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, sir.
And when you provided it to Detective Johnson, was that so it could be impounded as property and evidence under Sheriff's Case Number 18124974?
The only case number that I have access to is the original one that I wrote.
Okay, and as far as Detective Johnson's investigation or the case number associated with him, that was separate from at least your initial participation, is that right?
Correct. It was same individual, different case numbers.
Okay. Now, once you had provided that evidence item to Detective Johnson, is it fair to say that you had no further participation with the DNA aspect of the investigation?
That's correct.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Cross?
Briefly, Your Honor. Officer, were you the actual one who swabbed the inside of Mr. Winslow's cheek?
No, sir.
It was Detective Hubler,
Deputy Hudenpal was the one that physically did the swab.
but you were standing there watching him, right?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Winslow completely cooperated, right?
Yes, sir.
Willingly gave you that sample, right?
Yes, sir.
Nothing further.
All right, anything further?
Actually, if I may reopen, Your Honor.
All right, go ahead.
Very briefly. I neglected to show you a couple of exhibits. I apologize, Deputy. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you first what's been marked as People's Exhibit 7 for identification. And I'm going to show you a series of exhibits. First, do you recognize what's in People's Exhibit 7?
Yes.
And I apologize, I will refer to them as courts exhibits. Looking at courts Exhibit 7 for identification, do you recognize that?
Yes, sir.
And who is that?
That is the defendant.
Did you take that photograph?
I did.
Was that taken on June 7th of 2018?
Yes, sir.
And what does that show a close-up of his face and shoulder area?
Yes, sir.
Showing you People's Courts Exhibit 8 for identification. Is that also the defendant in a photograph taken that day?
Yes, sir.
And does it show him from head to the toe in overall view?
Yes, sir.
You see that he's wearing a cut-off T-shirt with his arms exposed.
Yes, sir.
Is that what he was wearing when you contacted him in the Hummer H2 driving in the city of Encinitas?
That's correct.
Showing you Courts Exhibit 9 for identification, does that show the left arm area, an overall shot of the tattoos extending from his forearm up to the top of his shoulder?
Yes, sir.
Showing you Courts Exhibit 10 for identification, does that also show now the right side with his right arm exposed from his, with the tattoos shown from his wrist area to his shoulder?
Yes, sir.
Now showing you Courts Exhibit 11 for identification, what is that, Deputy?
That is the vehicle that I described earlier, the Hummer H2.
And is that a photograph that was provided to you by a civilian?
Yes,
And does that show the rear portion of the vehicle parked in a neighborhood in Encinitas?
it does.
And lastly, showing you Courts Exhibit 12 for identification, is that a close-up view of that same black Hummer H2 of its license plate?
Yes, sir.
And is that 7VQT751?
Correct.
And was that photograph also taken and provided to you by a member of the public?
It was.
Do each of Court's Exhibits 7 through 12 fairly and accurately depict what we've described?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Nothing further, Your Honor.
All right, any cross?
Briefly, Your Honor. Deputy, so you examined Mr. Winslow, right? You actually took those photos.
Yes, sir.
And you took a photo of all of his tattoos, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you see any tattoos on his arms that resembled a chain link, like a dog chain going up his arm to his wrist?
I do not recall.
Okay. And you looked at both of his arms, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And those were the only tattoos that he had is what you took a photo of, right?
Yes, sir.
And you don't remember seeing any sort of chain link tattoos on either of his arms, is that right?
No, sir.
Nothing further.
Right, just to be clear, you asked the question in the negative and asked if that was right, so I'm not sure what the answer was. So, do you remember seeing any sort of chain link tattoos on either of his arms?
I do not.
Okay, that just clears it up. Any other questions?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Any redirect?
No, thank you.
All right, can this witness be excused?
You may.
All right. Mr. Watkins, can this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Deputy. Have a nice day.
Your Honor, I'm going to ask that he be subject to recall, not that I expected it would be an issue.
Okay, well, then you are subject to recall. You are not excused at this time, but he can leave for the day, correct?
You can.
Okay, but you're still subject to recall.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next witness.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. The people call San Diego Sheriff's Detective Michael Benavides.
You do solemnly state that the testimony you are about to give in the matter now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
If you would, please have a seat at the witness stand.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good.
And if you would, please state your name and spell your first and last name for the record.
Michael Benavides, first name is spelled M-I-C-H-A-E-L. Last name spelled B as in boy, E-N-A-V-I-D-E-S.
Thank you.
All right, direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Detective Benavides.
Good morning, sir.
Can you please tell the jury what you do for a living?
I'm a sheriff's detective for the county of San Diego.
How long have you been a sheriff's detective with the county of San Diego?
About 8 years.
How long have you been a member of law enforcement in total?
22 years.
What were some of your prior assignments before becoming a detective?
Prior to being a sexual assault detective, I was an area detective at the Encinitas Station, which is now the North Coastal Station. I worked patrol, I worked in our SWAT team, I worked community-oriented policing. I worked in jails for 4 years.
You mentioned that you're currently a sexual assault detective. Can you explain to the jury the way the San Diego Sheriff's Department is organized in terms of the sexual assault unit versus area investigations versus patrol deputies who work at the substations?
As a sexual assault unit, our unit handles, our criteria is different than, say, an area detective from a patrol station. We handle all felony sexual assaults that involve serious bodily injury, stranger and unknown suspect rapes, as opposed to, say, date rapes that the area detective would handle. High-profile cases, felony and statutory rape cases, any series, a rape series in the county of San Diego.
Is there in fact a age-based dividing line between cases that would be handled by the sexual assault unit versus cases that may be handled by the child abuse unit or the family protection unit within the Sheriff's Department?
Yes, sexual assault handles ages 14 and above. The child abuse unit handles 13 and below.
And is that in fact a reflection of the status of the law in terms of various crimes that may apply at the age of 14 or over versus younger than 14?
Yes.
Now, what sort of training did you receive in order to become a sexual assault unit detective?
Been to the basic sexual assault course, which is 40 hours. We also receive field evidence collection of the 40 hours. We go to a basic investigations course. We also go to some advanced sexual assault or even child abuse courses as well.
Does some of that training include the collection of evidence that would be specific to sexual assault investigations?
Yes.
What would be one of the hallmark features of a sexual assault case that is different from other types of investigations in terms of evidence collection?
For a sexual assault case, our victims generally get what we call as a SART examination, where a forensic nurse examines and collects evidence from our victim, and we participate in that interview process.
In addition to a potential SART kit or a rape kit that's commonly referred to in the media or in public discourse, as a sexual assault detective, do you also personally attempt to retrieve any clothing and or bedding or other materials that may be relevant to your investigation?
Yes.
Now, I want to ask you about your investigation into a case that was reported to have occurred on March 17th of 2018 involving a woman who we're going to refer to as Jane Doe number 1. As of March of 2018, were you a detective in the sexual assault unit?
Yes,
How long had you been a detective in the sexual assault unit at that point?
about 1.5 years.
During the course of your 1.5 years in the sexual assault unit, approximately how many sexual assault investigations have you conducted?
Probably over 50. We've had, usually generally have 1 or 2 cases a week.
In addition to that 1.5 years in the sexual assault unit and the 50+ investigations you had done, had you also investigated reported sexual assaults as an area detective?
Yes,
Approximately how many would you say you investigated?
probably close to 100. I spent 5 years as an area detective.
So then, in March of 2018, how was it that you were ultimately assigned the case involving Jane Doe 1?
It was considered an unknown or stranger rape, so that met our criteria as part of being a sexual assault unit.
When you use the term unknown or stranger rape, what do you mean by that?
Where the suspect is unknown to the victim.
So then, in that sort of a scenario, is that when the sexual assault unit would be assigned the case, a detective such as yourself versus an area detective working at a substation?
Yes,
Was there a point in time when you then took over the investigation after it had been initially reported through the substation?
yes.
Do you recall specifically when you were assigned the case?
Can I refer to my notes?
Yes, if it would refresh your recollection.
March 26, 2018.
And would that in fact be within a week of when the initial report came in on March 21st of 2018?
Yes,
Now, once you were assigned the case, is it fair to say that you needed to conduct some follow-up investigation?
yes.
Was there a point in time where you received information from Sexual Assault Unit Detective John Johnson where you realized that there were some commonalities between your case and a case that he was investigating?
Yes,
Was the sheriff's case number you were investigating 18115-149?
yes, correct.
And was the sheriff's case number that Detective Johnson was investigating 18124-974?
Yes,
Now, after you and Detective Johnson began to compare notes and discuss the ongoing investigations that each of you had been assigned, was there a point in time where you met personally with Jane Doe 1?
yes.
Did that take place earlier in your investigation?
I'd say early meaning timeframe, probably within a couple months, 2 months.
Was that in fact in May of 2018?
Yes,
Did you also meet with her on a second occasion on June 12th of 2018?
yes,
When you met with Jane Doe number 1 on June 12th of 2018, did you ask her whether or not she had retained the clothing that she had worn on March 17th, 2018, the day that she stated she had been assaulted?
yes,
Did she tell you she had?
yes,
Did you, in fact, retrieve and recover the clothing that she had been wearing that day?
yes.
What items of clothing did you recover?
Pants and underwear.
Can you describe the pants that she provided you?
It was a white leather pants, and the underwear was, the women's underwear, pink in color.
In terms of the pants, can you describe the condition of them?
It was white, leathery, and I saw some stains on the pants.
Can you explain to the jury the process that you follow in order to collect items of evidence in a sexual assault case, specifically clothing that may contain biological matter?
I separate each item and package them separately, seal them, and I then submit it into our main evidence for processing.
What do you use in order to seal the items as you process them separately?
Use tape, and then we initial and date over the tape and onto the package.
And what type of packaging is it?
It'd be a brown paper bag.
So then is it fair to say that you use 2 separate paper bags, 2 separate sealing tapes, one for the underwear that was provided to you and one for the white leather pants?
Yes,
And did you in fact impound each of them under separate item numbers under your case ending 149?
yes,
Did you in fact impound the item women's leather pants as property item number 4?
yes,
And did you impound the women's underwear as property item number 5?
yes,
That was done on June 12th of 2018?
yes.
What did you do after impounding those 2 items with respect to any potential forensic analysis of them?
I submitted and requested for a DNA analysis on the clothing.
Can you explain to the jury that process, what you do?
I include in my report or my the drop-down menu of the property section, I select as a sexual assault case, and it gets processed by our crime lab.
Was there in fact an analyst who was assigned to the case who was going to conduct a comparison between those 2 items that you had personally recovered and a reference sample from a suspect by the name of Kellen Winslow that had been recovered by Deputy Sean Dwyer?
Yes,
And did you specifically make that request of the lab?
yes,
And was that analyst who was assigned to that request a woman by the name of Kelly Hensley?
yes.
May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to show you what's been marked as Court's Exhibit 14 for identification, directing your attention to the item that is depicted on the left side of the exhibit. Do you recognize it?
Yes,
And what is that?
it's the white leather pants.
Were those the pants that were collected by you from Jane Doe number 1 on June 12th of 2018?
Yes,
Were those the pants that you identified as being an item that required further forensic analysis in comparison to a sample from Mr. Winslow?
yes,
Do you see Mr. Winslow in court today?
yes.
Where is he seated and what is he wearing?
Seated to my left, wearing a dark-colored suit with a yellow tie and wearing eyeglasses.
All right, the record will reflect identification of the defendant.
Thank you. Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
All right, Cross?
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Benavides, the incident occurred on March 17th, is that right?
Correct.
And you received these items on June 12th, is that right?
Yes,
So about 3 months after.
yes,
Isn't it important to get items right after the event? Is that important?
that's correct.
Yeah. And that way the evidence is fresh, right?
Yes,
She saved her clothes for 3 months, is that right?
correct.
Did she wash them?
Yes,
Objection calls for hearsay.
Sustained. The answer will be stricken. The last answer will be stricken from the record. The jury shall disregard it, just treat it as though you never heard it. All right, next question.
Did their pants appear clean to you?
I'm sorry?
Did their pants appear clean to you?
Somewhat, there were some stains on it.
Did they appear like they have been washed?
It's hard to tell with the stains.
Okay. She only brought 2 items to you, is that right?
Correct.
Did you tell her to only bring 2 items?
No.
Okay. She chose those 2 items to bring to you, is that
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Okay. These items, when you talked about gathering evidence and items such as this, these items are usually gathered during a SART exam, is that right?
correct.
Okay. What is a SART exam?
It's offered to victims of sexual assault where they are examined by a forensic nurse and bring them, transfer them to a facility. They're interviewed by a forensic nurse and, again, physically examined where they collect DNA evidence, take photographs, etc.
So those are very important exams, is that right?
Correct.
Those exams can be used to prove a violent rape happened, right?
Yes.
Did she in fact do a SART exam?
No.
Thank you, nothing further.
Any redirect?
No, thank you.
All right, thank you, Detective. You can resume your seat at council table. All right, next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The people now call Kelly Hensley.
You do solemnly state that the testimony you are about to give in the matter now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
If you would, please have a seat at the witness stand. And if you would, please state your name and spell your first and last name for the record.
Kelly Hensley, Kellyley Hensley.
Thank you.
All right, good morning, Ms. Hensley.
Good morning.
Direct examination?
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Hensley, can you tell the jury what you do for a living?
I am a criminalist in the Forensic Biology Unit of the San Diego Sheriff's Department Crime Laboratory.
What does that mean?
My job duties are to process items of evidence for biological fluids, develop a DNA profile if I am able, and compare that DNA profile to the items of evidence and other known items from known individuals, those are reference samples, to try and determine who may have left DNA on an item of evidence.
How long have you been with the San Diego Sheriff's Department Crime Lab?
Almost 11 years.
And in those 11 years, have you worked as a criminalist in the Forensic Biology Unit continuously?
Yes.
How often would you say that you conduct analysis on DNA items?
Every day, technically. I'm doing some part of the DNA process, whether that's working in the laboratory or doing desk work, issuing reports and doing data analysis.
Is it fair to say that you've tested thousands of items to determine whether or not an individual has left DNA behind on them?
Yes.
Prior to your experience with the San Diego Sheriff's Department Crime Lab over the last 11 years, did you have prior experience as an analyst in the area of DNA analysis?
Yes.
And what would that experience be?
I began working in the first DNA laboratory in 2001. I worked at a laboratory called Cellmark Diagnostics, and the first 2 years there, I worked as an evidence technician. I received the evidence into the laboratory, opened it up, and recorded what was received. In 2003, I was promoted to a DNA analyst, and there I performed the same duties I currently do here. In 2005, I moved cross country and moved to San Diego. Started working at another private DNA laboratory called Crime Scene Technologies, there as a DNA analyst as well. And then in 2008 is when I started at the Sheriff's Department.
What specific formal education did you receive in order to become a forensic analyst in the area of DNA for nearly the last 20 years?
I have a bachelor's degree in biology from Luther College, as well as a Master of Forensic Science degree from the George Washington University. Along with my degrees, specific coursework is required to do DNA analysis, and those classes that must be taken are genetics, molecular biology, and biochemistry. So I have taken those, as well as taking recommended courses on population statistics and genetics to help me do my data analysis and interpretation.
So both in your experience working for private laboratories and then also your experience working for a law enforcement crime laboratory, specifically the Sheriff's Department here in San Diego, how many times have you actually testified in Superior Court?
I would estimate 30 to 40.
Is that a regular part of your duties in addition to the actual analysis that you conduct?
Yes, it is.
Now, I want to ask you specifically about sexual assault cases. In terms of the Forensic Biology Unit of the Sheriff's Department, is there a division of labor within the unit in terms of who conducts what type of analyses and on what type of crime investigations?
Kind of. There is overlap, but the laboratory in the DNA unit is divided into two case working groups. One of them is doing the majority of property crimes, car thefts, residential burglaries, and that type of crime. The other group does the majority of the homicides, sexual assaults, and assault cases.
And do you work within the section of the Forensic Biology Unit that investigates homicides, sexual assaults, and crimes of violence?
Yes, I do.
And how long have you been working within that section of the crime lab?
The entire, well, that's not true. For the first maybe 6 months at the Sheriff's Department, I was assigned to the other group of the property crimes and lower crimes, and a position opened up, and I was moved into the major crimes unit. So about 2009, I would say, is when I started in the major crimes unit.
And have you been working there continuously for over the last 10 years?
Yes.
Now, can you explain to the jury, as best you can in layman's terms, what DNA is and how it's left behind?
So DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the genetic material within our bodies that determines our eye color. We have 2 eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs. It makes us a person and an individual. You get half of your DNA from your mom and half from your dad, so it makes us a unique person as an individual. With the exception of identical twins, every person has a unique DNA profile that is unique to them only. So DNA can be left behind a number of ways. Anytime you come into contact with something, you leave DNA behind. You can touch something, you leave your DNA behind. DNA is also found in the body fluids within our body, saliva, blood, semen. Urine and feces can also have DNA in them, it's inherently in all of our body fluids.
When you're describing the way the DNA is left behind and you say that it can be left behind when you touch something or touch an item, is that something that is commonly referred to as touch DNA?
Yes.
What is touch DNA and how is that different from DNA that can be located within a bodily fluid?
We have screening procedures or ways to search for body fluids, which we cannot search for DNA that's just left by touching something. Oftentimes, but not always, the DNA that's left from touching something is in a lesser quantity than it may be in a body fluid. I mean, there are variables, so it's not always the case, but that's often the case. So a lot of times when we're looking for DNA of something that was simply touched, we're kind of just collecting the sample best we can without kind of knowing what we're getting, because we don't have a red-brown stain that's indicating blood may be present or something like that.
What would be the source of the genetic material from the skin? So, for example, the hand. What type of bodily excretion or whatever it may be contains the genetic material when you touch an item?
So our skin cells that slough off on our hands regularly, they have DNA in them, as well as any perspiration that may be on your hand, that can be left behind. The other things to consider when you're touching an object is whether you've recently washed your hands or you put your hand in your mouth. You might have saliva on your hands, which then could transfer more DNA when you touch something. But most of the time, the touching is just simply this contact from our hand and transferring cells onto an item.
Why is it that touch DNA that may contain skin or epithelial cells or perhaps sweat, why is that different from DNA that comes from bodily fluids in terms of the quantity of DNA that you would expect to see left behind?
So, as I said, it's usually a smaller amount that's left behind when you simply touch something, but as there are those other variables, it's not always the case.
You've mentioned a couple of the types of bodily fluids that you often see when you conduct your analysis. Can you just tell the jury what those are?
The majority of the time, we are looking for body fluids such as blood and semen. Saliva is another one. Again, and we also have tests for urine and feces that we can conduct in the laboratory.
What sort of tests do you use in order to detect whether or not blood is present on an item?
The first thing we do is look for a red-brown stain. If we see a red-brown stain on an item, that's a visual indication that blood may be present. We also have a presumptive test, which is just a preliminary test that can guide me and indicate to me that a blood stain may be present, and that the test is called Kastle-Meyer. And it's a color change test so that in the presence of blood, the reagent turns a bright pink color. So if I see a change to that bright pink with the visual red-brown staining, that will indicate to me that that sample is blood.
You mentioned that at least the initial step of the process to detect whether or not blood is present is a visual inspection of the item. Is that right?
Correct.
When you're conducting your analysis of an item, in particular using the example of an item of clothing, do you have a certain methodology that you personally use when you see whether or not there are reddish-brown stains along the item?
Usually we'll document them either in a drawing of notes or photography, circle the stains so that I know where they are and they'll be able to find them again if I need to find them again.
when you use the presumptive test, the Kastle-Meyer that you just described, is that basically a chemical process that once you detect the presence of blood, then that alerts you that there may be potentially biological material there?
Yes.
You keep using the term red-brown stain. Why do you use both of those colors when you're describing the stains?
When we typically in the laboratory, when I see a blood stain, it's been placed there, it's dried, and it's turned a red-brown color. It's not bright red like an apple. It's not brown. It's kind of like a dried blood stain, a reddish-brown color, and that's typically what we look for.
Is it fair to say that DNA analysis can still has its limitations, even though it may be much more advanced, even within the last 5 years than it had been 5 years before?
Yeah.
Would one of those limitations be that you could only detect the presence of DNA on an item at the time that you actually conduct that analysis on the item?
Objection, Your Honor, leading.
She's an expert on it.
Overruled, it's foundational. You can answer the question.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. Would one of those limitations be that you can only detect DNA that is present at the time that you actually conduct the analysis of the item you're testing?
I'm not sure I understand.
It's only there when you test it, right?
The portion that I test for the analysis is only available for testing as I'm testing it. Yes, there may be more to go back to at a later date, but the specific portion I test is only available at the time I'm testing it.
Okay. So then let me ask you about some of the forensic analysis that you did into the crime investigation with the San Diego Sheriff's Department Sexual Assault Unit. Were you assigned to assist with the analysis that had been submitted by Detective Michael Benavides in case ending 149?
Yes.
When was it that you were provided specific items of evidence to analyze in that case?
June 13th, 2018.
Based upon your review of the request that was made and the items that had been collected, were those items in fact received and recovered by the Sheriff's Department the day before on June 12th, 2018?
I do not know when they were collected.
Now, on June 13th, how is it that you receive an assignment, and then what steps do you take in order to complete that?
My supervisor approached me with an analysis request and asked if I could do it in an expedited fashion. He said the evidence items would be coming to the lab later that day, and we'd be expecting a phone call when they arrived at the laboratory. The evidence did arrive. I met with Detective Benavides as he was bringing the evidence to our property and evidence unit. We briefly discussed the case, and then that same day, I pulled the items from our property and evidence unit and took them into the laboratory.
Now, prior to your analysis of the items that Detective Benavides had submitted for analysis, did you, in fact, have information and review the analysis that had been conducted by a fellow criminalist within the Sheriff's Crime Lab regarding a reference sample from a person identified as Kellen Winslow in case ending 974?
Yes.
And when you reviewed that information, was that in fact analysis that was personally done by criminalist Michael Palermo?
Yes.
When you reviewed what he had done, did he in fact develop a DNA profile that was unique to that reference sample for Kellen Winslow?
Yes.
Since the time that you did your initial comparison, have you had an opportunity to do a complete technical review of criminalist Palermo's analysis and ultimately his conclusions?
Yes, I have.
And did you in fact do that in preparation for your testimony in this case?
Yes.
Now, when you went through that technical review process for the development of the DNA profile for Mr. Winslow's reference sample, did you know any abnormalities?
No.
Did his conclusions and the specific DNA profile that was obtained, would that have been the same had you personally conducted that analysis based upon your review of his notes and the raw data associated with it?
Yes.
Now, can you just tell the jury what a DNA profile is and why it is that that's unique to an individual?
So you get half of your DNA from your mom and half of your DNA from your dad. So we look at multiple locations along the DNA strand. Currently, we're looking at 27. And at each one of those locations, again, there are a maximum of 2 DNA types, one from your mother and one from your father. And because the way the DNA is inherited, you get different DNA types at each of the locations. Siblings will share more than non-siblings, obviously, because they're getting the DNA types from their parents, but they're getting them differently along the 27 different locations we're looking at. So related people share more of their DNA profile, but that's how it inherited makes an individual unique DNA profile.
You mentioned that current technology looks at 27 different locations, is that right?
Yes.
And there would be, is it fair to say that there's like a numerical value assigned to each one of those locations?
There's a name for each one of those locations.
Okay. And in terms of somebody's personal DNA profile, would they have a number that is assigned for that individual that is, reflects the various locations that are there?
At each of the locations, there's a numerical value for the DNA type that occurs at each of the locations.
That's a much better way to say it. So then let me ask you, in terms of the 27 locations that are looked at now, how does that differ, for example, from the number of locations that were looked at even 10 years ago?
It's many more.
Do you recall how many, or over the course of your 20 years of conducting analysis, how many locations did you look at when you first came out of school and started working in this type of case?
I believe when I first started, there were 15 locations, and 2 of them are overlapping, so a total of 13.
Does that, in fact, reflect a greater sensitivity and a greater credence in the unique items or the individualization of the DNA profile? Now,
Yeah, the more loci that we look at gives us more ability to identify specific individuals because we're looking at more locations along the DNA strand.
so in terms of the reference sample that was obtained from Mr. Winslow, there were unique identifiers on the various 27 locations, right?
Correct.
Now, can you tell the jury what you do when you take an item that has unknown DNA on it and you compare it to a reference sample that would be characterized as a known?
When I have an evidence DNA profile, the first thing I do is look at the profile, try and interpret it, figure out how many contributors I think there are to this DNA profile, and then I use a software program to help me interpret and compare the DNA profile from an unknown to a known individual or reference sample.
In terms of the analysis in this case, ending 149, did you in fact determine whether or not there was DNA present in the white leather pants that had been collected from a person we're identifying as Jane Doe 1, who, an item that you identified in your report as item 2.2 after it had been impounded in this case?
Yes.
Can you just explain how the numbering of the items works when you're doing your analysis versus the numbering of the items that are impounded by the investigating agents?
The item itself was item 2.2. In the laboratory, within the DNA lab, we have an internal lens system which records all of our notes and collects our data that we're inputting and identifying in the samples and helps us process the DNA through the whole procedure. The lens system that we have will assign it a unique number as well. So we have the item number as well as the lens number often associated with a single item of evidence.
Now, did you also assign an item number to a reference sample that was obtained from Jane Doe number 1 herself?
Yes.
Did you assign item 2.1?
Yes.
Did you also assign an item number to a pair of underwear that had been collected from Jane Doe 1 as item 2.3?
Yes.
Now, regarding your visual inspection that you always do when you're testing clothing in a sexual assault case, did you in fact both photograph and document whether or not you detected any red-brown stains on the pants that had been collected from Jane Doe 1?
Yes, I did.
And did you detect any red-brown stains?
Yes, I did.
Can you just generally describe where you recall seeing in your visual inspection the red-brown stains?
I documented red-brown stains on the front outside of the pants and the back outside of the pants, and a stain also on the back inside of the pants.
Now, may I, Your Honor? May I
Yes.
approach?
I'm always looking for that. Just to be clear, is item 2.2 the white leather pants?
Yes.
Or was it a cutting from the white leather pants?
Item 2.2 is the white leather pants.
Okay, thank you.
I'm showing you what's been marked as Court's Exhibits 14 for identification. Do you see that there are two photographs, one on the left and one on the right?
Yes.
First, beginning with the photograph on the left, would those be item 2.2, the white leather pants that were collected and submitted for analysis?
Yes.
And do you, in fact, note on that specific photograph that those would be the outside front view of those pants?
Correct.
And is that your handwriting?
It is.
Looking at the item to the right, are those the same pants?
Yes.
And would that be a view from the inside back area of the pants?
Yes.
Do you see that in the top left-hand corner of the photo on the right that there is a handwritten circular marking that would be near the waistline extending down towards the buttocks area?
Yes.
And what does that indicate?
That's one of the areas I noticed that had red-brown staining.
And based on your visual inspection, did the red-brown staining, did it appear to be consistent with potential blood evidence?
Yes.
What did you do in terms of confirming or further testing whether or not there was any blood evidence located there?
I performed the Kasselmeyer test with positive results of the red-brown stain indicating blood.
You mentioned that there were numerous locations throughout the pants that you noted the same red-brown stain, is that right?
Yes.
And looking towards what would be the, maybe perhaps the rear crotch or lower buttocks area, do you see some discoloration in the pants?
Yes.
Would you characterize that as red-brown staining or something different?
It's less obviously red-brown staining, but it does have a red-brown hue to it.
Showing you Court's Exhibit 15 for identification, beginning with the photograph to the left. Do you have that physical exhibit in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Looking at that area, did you in fact note that that would be the crotch area or the front crotch area of the pants?
Correct.
And is that a close-up view?
Yes, it is.
Looking at the photograph to the right, would that be the crotch area as noted with the liner removed?
Yes.
Can you explain to the jury first who removed the liner and why did you do so?
I removed the liner. The pants were that white leather-like material on the outside, and then they had a sheer lining, which you can see about down to the knee. And to access the inner area, I wanted to remove the sheer crotch liner to access the pants underneath.
Did you see visually a staining within the crotch area that was consistent with something you would characterize as red-brown staining?
Yes.
When you removed the liner, can you explain why you removed it and what it was that you were attempting to locate?
I was just trying to access the actual pant material underneath the liner.
I'm showing you Court's Exhibit 16 for identification. What are we looking at here with respect to the pants?
The actual pant material after I removed the liner.
Would that still be within that same very specific crotch area, for lack of a better term?
Yes.
Can you just explain, beginning at 12 o'clock and rotating clockwise, what the various notations mean and why it is that you identified them in those ways?
The top corner says pants material equals 3.02. As I stated before, the lab ID for the pants is item 3, and 3.02 is how I documented that it was the pant material and not the liner, which was 3.01. If you look at the next one, it says scene area removed, 3.0, 2.01, and then the line goes down to a vertical rectangle. And that's where I removed portion of the seam of the pants to extract for DNA analysis and to do testing as item 3.0201. And then there are four squares that kind of go around that vertical rectangular, and this is 4 areas cut and extracted together. So those are 4 other smaller cuttings I took of the crotch area, the pant material, put in one tube and extracted for DNA as 3.02.02.
Ms. Hensley, why was it that you focused your analysis on that particular area, and why did you actually retrieve and test 4 separate pants cuttings from that interior crotch portion of the pants?
A portion of my analysis prior to this involved looking at the pants with an alternate light source. In an alternate light source, we make the room completely as dark as we can and use a light with special goggles to look at an item to see if anything glows. So if something glows, that's indicating to me that a body fluid may be present. So I'd already done that on these. And there was fluorescence or glowing in this crotch area. So I knew that's where I needed to focus. And when we have a large area that glows, I can't take the whole thing. It won't fit into my tubes for my analysis, and it doesn't make sense to do it that way. So I take a representative cutting of the area where I think the DNA from a body fluid may be, and I combine that into one tube and extract them together. And that's what I did with the 4 that are around the vertical rectangle.
So the fluorescing that indicates the presence of biological material with the alternate light source, did that in fact direct you to then retrieve those cuttings from that specific area?
That is part of my analysis, yes.
Now, once you retrieve those items and, as you said, basically put it in a test tube, what processes did you use in order to try to determine whether or not DNA was present?
The first thing I do is look for sperm. That's the confirmation in the way that we can confirm that semen is present. So I did that first, and then after that I move on to the DNA process to try and develop the DNA profile and actually extract the DNA out of the sample.
How do you look to see whether or not sperm is present?
I collect the sample as I did here with these 2 samples. Kind of do a small mini extraction where we add some chemicals to our sample, and then put it on a microscope slide and try and look under a microscope to see if I visualize any sperm cells.
When you did a microscopic examination of item 3.02.02, the 4 pants cuttings, the representative sample, did you visually note the presence of sperm cells?
May I refer to my case manager?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. For item 3.02.02,
Yes.
I did not observe any sperm initially. I then took those samples forward to the DNA analysis process, in which case, at a later date, I did observe sperm cells on that sample.
Now, when you say that you conducted further analysis in the determination of whether or not DNA is present, what physically does that mean? What is it that you're doing after the microscopic examination?
That's when I began the DNA process. So the first step in the DNA process is to extract the DNA out of the item. So in this example, it would be the cuttings from the pants. I'm trying to remove any of the DNA that's on the item into a solution in a liquid form. Once I have it extracted in its form, then purified form, then I do a quantitation step to see how much DNA I have. Once I know how much I have, the next step in the DNA process is called amplification, and that's where I use a technique, a machine does it for me, to make millions of copies of the DNA that I have. So I have a little bit to begin with, and I need a lot more to actually develop the DNA profile. And then after the amplification process becomes the development of the DNA profile, it gives me a visual representation of all of those locations that we had talked about earlier, along with each of the representative numbers that belongs in each one of those locations. So the first step is to extract the DNA out of the sample, and that's what I did next after I looked for sperm.
So then, once you had done that and then engaged in the amplification process, did you have a sufficient quantity of DNA to then compare to a reference sample that had been provided by Mr. Winslow?
Yes, I did.
And when you began that process, or at what step in that process did you attempt to isolate any sperm fraction from the balance of the DNA that had been collected from the 4 pants cuttings?
During the extraction step. There's 2 different types of extraction procedures I can do. One is for samples that most likely do not contain sperm, and when we have a sample that will contain sperm or is suspected to contain sperm, we do a different type of DNA extraction called a differential procedure.
Did you suspect that this sample that you had collected contained sperm at that point?
I did not identify sperm initially. It was ALS positive, so there was still an opportunity that sperm was present, so I took it forward to differential extraction.
And the ALS positive means that it fluoresced with the alternative light source, correct?
Correct.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you Court's Exhibit 13 for identification. Is that a diagram that you're familiar with?
Yes.
Does that in fact show the differential extraction process that you were just referring to?
Yes, it does.
Now, showing you Court's Exhibit 13, can you explain to the jury using this diagram what happens during the differential extraction process and how you're able to isolate a sperm fraction from a sample of DNA?
So the first portion of this exhibit shows like a combination of sperm and non-sperm cells. This is normal, it happens. Semen contains non-sperm cells and sperm cells, but there's also non-sperm cells from just contact and things that we touch. So we remove a portion of that, which is what I did with the pants, with removing the 4 cuttings and putting those in a tube, which is the next step. I add chemicals and heat to that, and it breaks open the cells and releases the DNA, the non-sperm cells into the DNA. So the non-sperm and the sperm cells have a different type of cell wall. So by initially adding heat and chemicals, the skin cells or epithelial cells, the non-sperm cells, break open much more easily. The sperm cells are very resilient. They have a very hard cell wall. It's hard to break open. So the regular extraction way will not break open sperm cells. So initially I break open the non-sperm cells. I remove then the non-sperm fraction of the DNA that has been released from the cell and put it in its own tube, non-sperm fraction. I then add more chemicals that are designed to break open the sperm cells. So then once that happens, the sperm cells are the remaining portion, and the DNA that comes from that makes the sperm fraction.
Once you've gone through the differential extraction process for an item of evidence, do you then further note the separation between the two, one as being NS or non-sperm fraction and the other as being S or sperm fraction?
Yes.
And does that still correspond to the same lab ID number that you've been discussing?
Yes.
Now, when you engage in the differential extraction process for the 4 pant cuttings for the interior crotch portion of the white pants collected from Jane Doe 1, did you in fact isolate the sperm fraction that contained a single source contributor of DNA?
Yes, I did.
Can you explain to the jury what a single source contributor means and why that's different from a DNA mixture, for example?
The single source DNA profile is from one person. One person contributed the DNA on the item. We often have mixtures of DNA that may have come from 2 people, 3, 4 people. It's just a mixture of the DNA profiles of multiple people. Mixtures are harder to determine who's actually in the mixture because people share DNA types. Although their DNA profile as a whole is unique to that person, they do share different types at locations, and that's normal and that happens. But when we have a single source profile, that's indicating that it's likely from one person and that one person contributed the DNA to that sample.
So let me ask you in terms of your comparison of the sperm fraction of the pants cuttings from the interior crotch area. Did you in fact isolate that sperm fraction and compare the DNA profile that was single source to the sample from Mr. Winslow?
Yes, I did.
And what did you determine based upon your comparison?
Once I have the DNA profiles and I've compared them, I have to perform a statistic that tells me what that means. The DNA profile obtained from the sperm fraction of the cutting from the crotch area of the pants was single source. It assumed it was from one person, and so the statistic I do is called a likelihood ratio. And what a likelihood ratio does is it compares two scenarios. So I know that I have my DNA profile. I need to figure out, is it, the two scenarios that I used are, it is from Kellen Winslow or it is from an unknown contributor. So what a likelihood ratio does is compares those two scenarios and figures out which one of those two scenarios is more likely. So the statistic is that the DNA profile obtained from item 2.2.02.02s, the sperm fraction, is 4.8 times 10 to the 24 times more likely if it originated from Kellen Winslow than if it originated from an unknown contributor.
What does that number really mean in layman's terms?
This is very strong support for the inclusion of Kellen Winslow on this item.
As the single source contributor to the sperm fraction?
Correct.
Now, can you give us an idea of what that exponential number actually means?
4.8 times 10 to the 24. So it's actually 48 with 23 zeros behind it is the number itself. So it's 48 with 23 zeros times more likely that it originated from Kellen Winslow than an unknown contributor. To help put context to that number, a million is 1 with 6 zeros. A billion has 9 zeros. A trillion has 12 zeros. So this is a 48 with 23 zeros behind it, times more likely.
Now, we've been discussing specifically the 4 cuttings that you...
Well, actually, is this a good time to take our break?
It would.
You're switching gears now? Okay. It is time for our morning recess. We're going to go ahead and take a 15-minute break. It is your duty not to converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this trial. You are not to form or express any opinion on this case until the case has finally been submitted to you. So please remember the admonition. We'll see you back here in 15 minutes. Please leave your notebooks as well as that charging summary in your notebook. Please leave those on your chair each time we take a recess. So we'll see you back here in 15 minutes. We're in recess.